Right now, a school bus is driving across a bridge the federal government rates as poor. So is a fully loaded semi. And today alone, Americans will cross one of these bridges about 163 million times. There are around 41,000 bridges in the US with that rating, and the old term for them, structurally deficient, makes it sound like they're basically waiting to collapse. But here's where it gets interesting. The most structurally deficient bridge to ever collapse didn't actually fail because of the thing that made it structurally deficient. So I wanted to figure out how worried we should actually be. And the first place I looked was the number, 41,000. But the more and more that I dug into it, the more I realized the number itself was one of the most misleading parts of the entire story. Basically, the rating sounds a lot worse than it actually is. Every public bridge in America gets inspected, and each major part is scored from 0 to 9. The deck you drive on, the beams underneath it, and the piers and foundations holding everything up. A 9 basically means new, a 0 means failed, but the entire bridge gets judged by its weakest part. So if just one major component scores a 4 or lower, the whole bridge gets labeled poor, even if everything else is in much better shape. For decades, the government called these bridges structurally deficient. Then, in 2018, it replaced that phrase with something simpler: good, fair, or poor. The rating system barely changed, only the wording did. But there was one important difference. The old definition was a little broader, so when the rules changed, around 6,500 bridges disappeared from the deficient list without anyone repairing them. They didn't get safer overnight, they just stopped being counted. So, some of the improvement you see in the headlines came from changing the definition, not actually fixing the bridges. So once I stripped away the dramatic wording, the label meant something pretty specific. One major part of the bridge had deteriorated enough to need repair, and the bridge needed to be watched more closely. It's basically like more of a check engine light than a countdown to major collapse. But then I wondered too, if a bridge is officially rated poor, why is it still open? The answer is that the system is designed to keep warm bridges open as long as they can still safely carry traffic. Okay, so most bridges are inspected every 2 years, and if the inspector finds something serious, the response happens in steps. They might inspect it more often, add a weight limit, reinforce it, repair it, and only close it if none of those options are enough. That weight limit is what allows a lot of these bridges to stay open. A bridge might no longer be strong enough for an 80,000 pound semi, but it can still safely carry normal cars, so heavier vehicles are forced to take another route. And here's the thing, things like rust, crumbling concrete, and exposed rebar can look terrifying, but looking dangerous and actually being unable to carry traffic are two very different things. The entire system depends on two things: inspectors finding the problems and someone actually fixing them. And that second part becomes very important later in this video. So, how close is a poor bridge to actually falling down? Well, for the overwhelming majority, not very close. Major bridge collapses in the US are extremely rare. Usually only a handful happen in an entire decade. And that's exactly why, when one does collapse, it becomes a disaster people remember by name. But the deeper I looked, the clearer it became. Bridges rarely collapse from the slow damage that earns a poor rating. They usually fall from something faster, often somewhere the rating does not capture. So what this label tracks is deterioration, but collapse can obviously come from something else entirely. The clearest example is actually the most famous one. So on August 1st, 2007, during evening rush hour in Minneapolis, the I-35 West Bridge collapsed into the Mississippi River. It was an 8-lane bridge, dropped about 100 feet, and 13 people lost their lives, and it injured 145. And this bridge matters because it had already been labeled structurally deficient for years. After the collapse, it became the national symbol of America's failing bridges. But when the NTSB finished its investigation, it found something entirely different. The bridge collapsed because of a design flaw from the 1960s. The steel gusset plates holding the truss together were about half as thick as they should have been. They held for decades until crews placed hundreds of thousands of pounds of construction material on the bridge. The plates buckled, and because the truss had no backup load path, the entire bridge came down. So the most famous structurally deficient bridge collapse in America had almost nothing to do with the condition that earned it that label. That brought me back to a simpler question. Forget the label, what actually makes a bridge collapse? But first, if you like videos that break down how massive infrastructure really works, subscribe. It really helps the channel, and there's a lot more content coming. So there are 4 main reasons why bridges collapse. The first is scour. So during a flood, fast-moving water can wash away the dirt and rock around a bridge's underwater foundations until the piers lose their support. The U.S. Geological Survey calls scour the leading cause of bridge failure in America, responsible for more than 60% of them. And it is especially dangerous because it happens below the waterline, where a normal visual inspection may not catch it. The second is impact, like a ship hitting a pier or an overheight truck striking a beam. The clearest example is the Francis Scott Key Bridge in Baltimore, which collapsed in 2024 after a massive cargo ship lost power and hit one of its main supports. And that risk is actually growing because modern cargo ships can be around 10 times larger than the vessels many older bridges were designed to handle. The third is fracture critical failure. A part with no backup. If one component breaks, the load has nowhere else to go, and the bridge can come down with it. And the fourth is corrosion. Salt, water, and time slowly eat away at steel and concrete. This is the kind of damage that the poor rating mostly tracks, and sometimes the thing that starts it is almost unbelievably small, like a clogged drain sending water onto a critical part of the bridge for years. So the damage that earns a bridge its poor rating is not always the same thing that eventually brings it down, but sometimes that slow deterioration does become the cause of the collapse. And in 2 bridges that failed 39 years apart, it started with the exact same problem, a clogged drain that kept pouring water onto a critical part of the structure. In June 1983, a 100-foot section of Interstate 95 in Greenwich, Kentucky, dropped about 70 feet into the river below. 3 people lost their lives. Investigators found that a fracture-critical pin and hanger connection had corroded until it failed, and the reason was simple. Drains above it had been paved over, sending water onto the connection for years. The bridge was only 25 years old, and it had actually just passed a routine inspection just 9 months earlier. Then, in January of 2022, the Fern Hollow Bridge in Pittsburgh collapsed about 100 feet into the ravine below, taking a city bus and several cars with it. That bridge was around 50 years old and carried about 14,000 vehicles a day. Somehow, nobody lost their lives. Investigators found that a fracture-critical tie plate had corroded until it failed. The city had ignored repair recommendations for more than a decade, and once again, clogged drains had been sending water onto the structure. The bridge had been rated poor since 2011. It was almost the exact same failure, 39 years apart. Blocked drains, trapped water, corrosion, and one critical part with no backup. It happened once in Connecticut, and then decades later, it happened again in Pennsylvania. And the timing in Pittsburgh was almost unbelievable. So the bridge collapsed just hours before President Biden was scheduled to arrive in the city for a speech about infrastructure. By this point, the pattern was hard to ignore. A lot of the rules protecting America's bridges were written only after people lost their lives. Okay, December 1967. The Silver Bridge over the Ohio River collapsed during rush hour. 46 people lost their lives. The entire bridge came down because one critical eye-bar fractured, with no backup behind it. Before that, there was no national rule requiring bridges to be inspected on a regular schedule. That collapse led to the National Bridge Inspection Standards, the 2-year inspections and 0 to 9 rating system this entire video has been explaining. The system exists because one bridge failed. And then it happened again. A bridge collapse caused by scour in New York in 1987 led to new federal rules for underwater erosion. The Sunshine Skyway collapse in Florida, where 35 people lost their lives after a freighter hit the bridge, led to new standards for ship strikes. So each disaster created a new rule, but those rules mostly applied to bridges built afterwards, while thousands of older bridges were grandfathered in. America keeps improving bridge safety one disaster at a time, while leaving much of the existing system left in the past. Which brings me back to where I started. If America keeps learning these lessons, why are there still around 40,000 poor bridges? Well, part of the answer is age. America built a huge number of its bridges during a roughly 20-year stretch around the start of the interstate system in the 1950s. Most were designed to last about 50 years. The average bridge in the US is now around 47 years old. Poor bridges average closer to 68, and more than 4 in 10 have already passed the 50-year mark. Basically, an entire generation of bridges is reaching old age at the same time. Part of it is money, but there's another reason most people overlook. Maintenance is invisible when it works. If a bridge gets inspected, repaired, and kept in good condition, nothing happens. Traffic keeps moving, nobody gets hurt, and nobody really notices. There's no dramatic before and after. No headline, no ribbon cutting. A politician can cut a ribbon on a brand new bridge. Nobody holds a press conference because an old one got redecked and should last another 20 years. So maintenance is easy to delay until delaying it is no longer an option. And by then, the cost is much higher. Keeping a fair bridge in good shape costs far less than rebuilding one after it falls into poor condition. The cheapest time to fix a bridge is also the time politicians get the least credit for doing it. So, I followed the money, and it led back to one number in the tax code. The federal government funds much of its share of America's roads and bridges through the Highway Trust Fund, which is fed mostly by the federal gas tax, which is 18.4 cents per gallon. But that tax has not been raised since 1993, the same year the World Wide Web became public, and it was never tied to inflation. So while the tax stayed frozen, the cost of concrete, steel, and labor kept rising. Today, that same 18.4 cents buys less than half of what it did back then. So to have the same purchasing power it had in 1993, the gas tax would need to be roughly twice as high. And the fund is being drained in 3 directions at once. Inflation keeps reducing what each cent can buy. Cars are becoming more fuel efficient, so drivers buy less gas. And as more people switch to electric vehicles, some stop paying the gas tax entirely. The Highway Trust Fund has been functionally broke since 2008. Since then, Congress has kept it alive by transferring hundreds of billions of dollars from the general budget. Then, in 2021, the infrastructure law put $40 billion directly towards bridges, the largest dedicated bridge investment since the interstate era. And the money has helped repair and replace thousands of bridges, but the estimated cost to fix every bridge that needs work is around $467 billion. So even the largest bridge investment in generations covers less than 1/10 of the total problem. So it does help slow the decline, but it does not come close to really solving it. So, is any of this actually getting better? Well, yes, but slowly, and with one major catch. According to the American Road and Transportation Builders Association's analysis of federal bridge data, the number of poor bridges has been slowly falling. About a decade ago, roughly 9% of American bridges were rated poor. Today, that number is around 6.7%. In one recent year alone, the total fell by a few hundred, with California, Iowa, and Pennsylvania making the biggest improvements. So the spending is having an effect. The worst bridges are slowly being repaired, replaced, and taken off the list. But the same data shows a bigger problem. As some bridges are repaired and move out of the poor category, older bridges are sliding down from good into fair. Now, about half of all bridges in America are rated fair, just one step above poor. That means that there is a huge group of bridges that could become much more expensive problems if they do not get regular maintenance. And even after the largest bridge investment in 65 years, the American Society of Civil Engineers still gave US bridges a C in 2025, the same grade they gave them in 2021. So what does this mean? Basically, the country is repairing bridges at almost the same speed the rest of the system is aging. So after looking at all of this, I wanted to know which bridges we should actually be worried about. And it really comes down to 4 groups, each risky for a different reason. The first group is the high traffic bridges. Some poor rated bridges in California carry close to 289,000 vehicles a day, so even a small risk affects a huge number of people. The second group, and probably the most concerning, is poor bridges with no backup if one critical part fails. That's the Silver Bridge, Mianus, and Fern Hollow type, where one failure can bring down the entire structure. Then there are scour-critical bridges, especially older ones built on shallow foundations in rivers that flood. And finally, bridges exposed to ships. Federal investigators identified 68 bridges across 19 states that were built before modern ship strike standards and have never been reassessed the way Baltimore's Key Bridge should have been. That list includes bridges like the Brooklyn Bridge, the Golden Gate, and the Mackinac Bridge, but the group that surprised me the most was not in a major city. Iowa has more poor bridges than any other state, both by total number and by percentage. Most are aging county roads and farm crossings. So the center of America's bridge problem is not a famous skyline. It's closer to a cornfield. So after looking at all of this, here's where I landed. The 40,000 bridge number is real, but it is also one of the most misunderstood statistics in American infrastructure. The real problem is not that 40,000 bridges are about to collapse. It is that America built an incredible bridge network, failed to keep up with the maintenance, and created a system that rewards building something new more than quietly fixing what is already there. Now we are left managing an aging system, one repair, and sometimes one disaster at a time. So the idea that one of these bridges is going to suddenly collapse under you tomorrow was never the best way to understand the problem. And this story is far from over. The current federal infrastructure funding authorization expires in 2026, and the Highway Trust Fund behind it could run out of money around 2028. At the same time, half of America's bridges are sitting in the fair category and continuing to age towards poor, with no fully funded plan to stop it. Eventually, that bill has to be paid. The only question is whether we pay for maintenance now or wait until the bridge decides the schedule for us. If you want more videos breaking down how the built world actually works, subscribe. I'm Tristan, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.